I have to agree with you. In terms of the members of the group in South Australia, they tend to be from the Labor left or Liberal wets, and they are people who are genuinely concerned about the welfare of people in developing countries. As to their understanding of what the development is, I think that probably comes down to the individuals. But I agree with you, there's a long way to go for most politicians to understand what sustainability really is.
Tom Gosling, I'm a member of Sustainable Population Australia. Hi. That's better. Might be a straw man, but when I have discussed this issue with some people who are proponents of fossil fuel solutions, they point out that there's this huge reserves of natural gas, for instance, in northwest Australia and so on. But I noted with interest that you were talking about the need to rapidly develop alternative energy solutions, and some of these might be, for instance, in Western Australia. I know now there's experimenting with wave power generators, which are looking very promising, and there's also geothermal in South Australia. And these can hasten the sort of transition to a hydrogen economy which will provide transport fuels. But I mean, my essential standpoint all along has been that even if there were no such thing as climate change or peak oil, there'd still be a lot of rational reasons to argue for population stabilisation.
Thanks, Tom. One of the reasons I have as one of the terms of reference for this committee, I have a term of reference about alternative fuels, because it's something that does need to be examined. Yes, we've got gas reserve, but we're going to have peak gas just as we have peak oil, I think in about 30 years. I'm not sure of it. And for those who advocate nuclear, even if you go beyond all the concerns about waste and so on, there's going to be peak nuclear, which I understand is in about 12 years. Ethanol doesn't appear to be a really, really good choice, because most people here would understand that what's happening is that people are, instead of growing crops to sustain themselves, instead turning it over to growing fuels that are going to make ethanol, because it's got a better financial return for them. There does not appear to be any quick fix. Geothermal energy, probably from what my understanding in South Australia, probably could be up and running within about 8 years at the earliest, and even if that works, that's part of the electricity supply rather than what's going to fuel cars and all that transport oil requires. So I don't think there's any quick fix, and that's what I hope that the Select Committee will come to understand, that there isn't a quick fix, and because there isn't a quick fix, then they're going to have to concentrate on these other things like dealing with urban sprawl, dealing with a huge investment in public transport infrastructure and so on.
Hi, I'm Scott Walker again. My understanding is that a range of barriers, including capitalism in general, economic greed, electoral promises relating to tax cuts, etc., and lobby groups and election campaign funding related to oil companies and that kind of thing, massive barriers for dealing with climate change today. My kind of question or query is whether it's possible, in a similar way that the former government had ideas for nuclear, to get national leadership and a national program for providing green energy that's not nuclear, but going against the tide of privatisation, and create a new national electricity grid that will allow the government to use its own funding and resources to provide its own electricity that will use green technology and provide it cheaper, to therefore combat the problems of coal, etc.
Okay, I'm not an electrician, but certainly with the way we use power at the present time, we have a problem in Australia because the cities that depend on it are so far away, and when you transmit that power over long distances, you lose an enormous amount of it just in the energy just going through the lines and so on. Just in Adelaide, the usual figure I give about the electricity I get at my home, I get it at about 25% efficiency from the original coal or gas from which it was manufactured. The longer the distances, the worse that becomes. Now, that's not to say it's an insurmountable problem if we can have a truly green energy source, if we go to DC transmission, but there are, from talking to the head of ETSA Utilities in South Australia, there are a few problems yet to be ironed out with DC transmission, but in the future it may well be the way we solve that problem, but it still doesn't address the issue of peak oil, unless of course we've got cars that are electric and they can plug into an electricity grid that is powered by a truly environmentally sustainable source.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew Melville-Smith, I'm a veterinarian from South Australia. We wanted to import 5 Riva vehicles last year to run them from solar panels. We're going to put solar panels on the roof so there would actually be no electricity usage. They would run purely from the power that we got from the solar panels. And we were told, no, you can't have them because they don't crash as well as 2-tonne four-wheel drives. Even though...
Nor do they crash as well as motorbikes, is that right?
I think I'd rather be in one of those than in a motorbike if it crashed.
Exactly.
But the statistics overseas show that they're actually safer than your average metal car, but we were not permitted to have them.
Yeah.
And I think that's just disgraceful. Your comment?
I actually raised that issue in my speech supporting my motion and said, why don't we simply create a new category of car registration? Very, very simple.